I just wanted to quickly touch on Yasuke one last time, and then we'll move on to what I consider to be far more important. There is some debate on whether or not Yasuke got the title of samurai, a debate that started long before Assassin's Creed Shadows. I see people pulling the racism card, calling people a racist, just because a lot of people were hoping that Ubisoft would have used the same formula for Shadows as they have for almost every other game they've put out over the past several years. By the way, I'm half Korean. I grew up in one of the most racist neighborhoods in Boston and was reminded I was half Korean every single day of my youth. My first name may as well have been Chink. I don't take the topic of racism lightly, but the best way I've known to deal with it is to joke about it, make light of it, because it undermines what they're trying to do, and that is insult you, demean you, and it had a profound effect on my outlook on life. But I don't see myself as a victim. They are, of their own shitty upbringing and insecurities. But anyways, back on topic. Contrary to what you're seeing on the internet, they're not giving Yasuke his credit because he's black. They say things like, oh, nobody's asking for the proof of these Japanese samurai. Well, for a lot of these Japanese samurai, you do have historical evidence. You do have stories of them being on the battlefield and such. Many of their stories can be traced back all the way to when they were a teenager, like Miyamoto Musashi, who won his first battle at age 13 and went on to win 60 more without ever losing a single one. Or Tomo Gozen, who was one of 5 survivors out of an army of 300 who went up against an army of 6,000. She supposedly collected the heads of 7 mounted warriors in that battle, and I say supposedly because, of course, there could be some exaggeration here and there, but back in those days it would be very dishonorable to take credit for something you didn't do. And when it comes to Yasuke, there just isn't a lot out there. There is a lot of fictional versions of him appearing in a lot of literature and media, but purely speaking on historical evidence, his documentation isn't as plentiful when compared to samurais like I just mentioned. And the truth is, what makes him stand out in feudal Japan is that he was black. And that's not what I have to say, my opinion. That's historical documentation. Nobunaga was fascinated with the color of his skin. At first, he thought his skin was dyed with ink. Upon discovering that it was his real skin, he took interest in him. Back in those days, Japan was like 0.14% black. And regardless of the debate on whether or not he was officially given the rank of samurai, it's still an interesting story. But when you look at some of the stuff that's been written about him in books, it kind of looks like it was written about him to sell the book, because a lot of it's based on speculation rather than historical documentation. There's just a lot of unknowns about the guy. Where he was from, for example. It is to be believed that he was from Mozambique, but there's no proof or evidence that he actually was. And I don't want to say that's the running theme with him, a lot of unknowns, but he is a mysterious figure. And I just feel if you're going to make a game about samurai and use historical figures, why not use the ones that you can definitively say he fought in this battle, he won this many duels? Why take a character and then make stuff up about him, like he was some sort of a legendary samurai? Is it possible that he had all these different duels and had all these different achievements? Of course, but someone more than likely would have written about them if he was a samurai. We have established that he was very unique for that time period. And so if he made an appearance anywhere, on a battlefield, a duel, he would have been easy to spot. There would be records of how many heads he took or how many battles he fought in. There's nothing. It's almost always worded as if he was a samurai, he would be by Nobunaga's side on those battlefields. He would be doing this, he would be doing that, rather than, hey, this is what the dude actually did. And here's a historical documentation to prove it. The reality is, if he didn't have dark skin and he was Japanese, you probably would have never heard of him. Is that a racist statement? Well, I see people make that statement all the time about white people in sports. You know, and if they were black, nobody would be talking about them. Nobody would care about them, that they probably wouldn't even make the roster. Is that a racist statement? I don't think so. Because sometimes I think it's true. Be honest with yourself. If Yasuke would have been Japanese, do you think they'd be making a video game about him? Probably not. But make no mistake, it is an interesting story, one that I feel is a bit over-dramatized and romanticized over the years. And it's usually to sell a book, like most historical figures. In any event, you know as well as I do, if the roles would have been reversed, there would have been hell to pay. But it's only Asian people, so who cares? And I only bring this up because some Asians feel like this game should be treated like almost every other game that came out in the past 5 years under Ubisoft. When Ubisoft added 2 sexes, weren't they trying to be more inclusive, where you essentially have the same characters split up in 2 different sexes? Like they did with Cassandra and her brother in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. They planned on doing it with Assassin's Creed Origins. They did it with Far Cry 6. They did it with Valhalla. And you just kind of assumed this was going to be the way forward. Enter a Japanese-themed game, and they're going about it differently. They would rather use somebody that was only notable because of the color of their skin, not a whole lot of historical documentation to draw from, by the way, rather than using a samurai where there's a wealth of source material. And so when some Asians watched the reveal trailer, they were wondering why are we all of a sudden doing it differently. And I'm sure I'm the last person you thought would talk about Asian representation in video games, but let's just quickly touch on that. If it weren't for Eastern developers, we wouldn't have much Asian representation. And when you do have it, it's almost always a ninja or a samurai or some ditzy, squeaky girl with disproportionate body parts, with her tits falling out of her shirt, dressed in a maid outfit. I'm not complaining, by the way. I'm just pointing out the obvious. And so now some Asians are like, now we're getting less representation because clearly we're not diverse enough, or we don't make enough of a dent when it comes to sales for them to care. I think if there were 3 of them, a brother and sister samurai duo and Yasuke as the retainer, that would have been a better way to go about it, in my opinion. If the roles were reversed, there would be hell to pay. And that's partly on the Asians. You have to speak up. It's like a lot of you guys don't want to stick together because, oh, he's Japanese, or he's Chinese, or he's Korean. The reality is the rest of the world don't care. We're all gonna get lumped into one pile and get treated the same. Just the way it is, man. Imagine if there was a video game about the Zulu tribe, and they plucked out the white guy that really didn't have much of a story and chose him as one of the protagonists. Devs would be putting their social media on private, burning social media down over it. But anyways, it's video games. It's not that big of a deal. Nobody is forcing us to buy them. The only thing I really have issue with is the double standards, the hypocrisy, which is why I'm starting my own company called Sweet Asian Inc. But all kidding aside, another thing I'm getting sick and tired of is anytime you guys stop pulling the racist card, just because you don't have enough wits to actually debate a position, you just sit there and accuse people of being all sorts of bad things. Not sure if you've noticed, but people are getting sick and tired of that. For me, it's more about challenging a lot of these double standards, this woke nonsense that's ruining everything, more than the actual video game itself. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you what you should do with your money, whether or not you should buy the game. What we discussed today doesn't have much of an impact when it comes to whether the game is going to be enjoyable or not. If you've been paying attention to video games lately and seeing the direction they're going in, you watch that Assassin's Creed Shadow trailer, the moment he takes off the helmet, you just have to roll your eyes and say to yourself, here we go again. And this isn't a black or white thing. There's plenty of black gamers that are hip to what's going on and also think it's ridiculous, forcing it. And with all of that said, I think the biggest story is the introduction of these mini battle passes, really shameful stuff. Ubisoft has become the worst company in this industry, and I won't be supporting them going forward.